All right. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use your question and answer tab there on your AWS interface, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can near the end of the webinar. Also, we have 3 polling questions during the course of today's webinar, so hopefully we can get everybody as engaged as possible with those. And at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So hopefully you'll be one of our lucky winners, so stick around. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is 7 simple ways to reduce your AWS spend. A great topic and so very timely. All right, our speakers today are JT Geary, who is the CEO and founder of NOps, and Rodney Lester, who is the principal architect for AWS WellArchitected at AWS. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
All right, great.
Cool. So, hi everyone. My name is JT Geary, and I'm the CEO of NOps. Just a little bit of background on myself. I've been migrating companies to AWS ever since EC2 was in beta. So I have a lot of experience in managing and building infrastructure on AWS, and I'm really excited about today's webinar. Really looking forward to sharing some best practices and some simple ways to better manage your AWS costs. And Rodney, do you want to maybe quickly introduce yourself as well?
Sure. So similar to you, I've actually been using AWS ever since EC2 was released. I used it at 2 separate companies before I joined AWS, but I've been with AWS for 9 years, and I've been actually part of WellArchitected in the various roles I've had at AWS ever since it started. So I've got a long history. Aside from that, you can always find me on LinkedIn to find details.
Cool. Remember, Rodney, when there was only EC2 and no EBS volumes, it was like so exciting when you can attach volumes to EC2 instances.
Very much.
Yeah. All right. So if you're not familiar with NOps, NOps is a cloud management platform for AWS. Our goal, our focus is to help companies to run well-architected infrastructure on AWS. You make a lot of decisions when you're building infrastructure on cloud, and we help companies to build and better monitor and manage their AWS spend and make sure they're constantly your infrastructure is aligned with well-architected frameworks. I'll quickly go over the agenda. Rodney will go first, and Rodney will talk about cost management. And after that, I'll go over 7 simple ways to reduce your AWS spend, and we'll also have a Q&A at the end. Before I hand it over to Rodney, we do have a quick poll, so we'll
Yes.
bring that up.
Yep. The poll should be coming out to you right now. The question is, what's your familiarity, which is not easy for me to say, with the AWS WellArchitected framework? It should be right there in your polling tab, guys. You can go ahead and make your choice. And we'll leave the poll open for a minute or so and let everybody go ahead and make your choice. And JT, you can go ahead and continue with your presentation if you'd like while we leave the poll open. Then we can come back and take a look at the results in a bit if you'd like.
Yeah, perfect. Actually, I'm going to just hand it over to Rodney.
Yep. Thanks, JT. So once again, I'll introduce myself, Rodney Lester. I've been with AWS for 9 years, and I am a principal architect for AWS WellArchitected. I have a particular experience in actually a lot of the concepts of WellArchitected, but I joined the group as a reliability expert, and I've been with WellArchitected for almost 4 years. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. So I talked about the fact that there are multiple pillars in the well-architected framework. Cost optimization is one of them, and we'll talk deeply about those. You can go ahead into the next slide. So one of the things I think is important to realize is that we're very much focused on saving our customers money, right? It's driving down the cost is part of the DNA of Amazon. It's also part of the DNA of AWS. You can go to the next slide. So one of the things that I want to point out here is often people think of cost optimization as simply cost reduction, but we believe it is making sure that you're getting the value for what you're spending your money on, and that you've got the lowest price point you could possibly get. It's the technology exists to serve the needs of the business, and cost optimization is basically that you're doing it the most efficiently. You can go to the next slide. All right, so we have a number of design principles around managing cost, and these are ways to think about approaching cost as you design your systems. You can go to the next slide. The first is a concept of implementing cloud financial management. That's really what InOps can help you with, right? So we want you to build this in as part of your operational cadence, that you're actually concerned about the cost of what you're doing. You're tracking when things spike. It's no different than managing any other operational cost that you have. You want to actually build this into part of your operational cadence. You can go to the next slide. So really, if you want to think about this, your cloud financial management team is someone who is basically involved with both the business, are you getting the business value, as well as the finance team who has the purse strings as to how much money you're going to spend. So the next design principle is to adopt a consumption model. So this really means that you should pay for what you use and don't pay for things that you aren't using. This naturally leads to things like auto scaling. So yeah, there's a good example. It's not good when your usage is very spiky and you're paying for a constant cost. When your usage is above what you're paying for, you obviously have a denial of service, and if you have it less, you're paying for things that you aren't using. So you can advance. Right, so this is better, right? It's tracking, but it's still not quite accurate. You still have both opportunities to lose business as well as pay for things you're not using. And next, and this is obviously where you really want to be, where your usage and cost track each other, and when you're not, basically, if you're not using it, you're not paying for it. So you can go to the next slide. And so a good example of this is really like a test environment. Most test environments are up 24 hours a day, and if you're not using it 24 hours a day, and you have an 8-hour workday, you've got 16 hours that you're paying for something you're not using. So if you apply automation in order to take down and bring up those test environments for when you're actually using it, and say you are using it for 8 hours a day, you can save substantial amounts of money. In this example, an example of just something costing you $1 an hour, over the course of a year, it would cost you $17,520. And if you just simply implemented this automation, you could save $10,848. And you can obviously extrapolate that out to larger things. You really need to measure the efficiency. So when I talk about measurement, this has to do with that business value, right? Are you actually getting the value for what you're paying for? So you need to be able to have metrics within your system to identify what the business value is. We talk a lot about KPIs, and that's what we really mean. So here's a great example of it, right? the CFO comes and says, my monthly spend has gone up by 15%. What's going on? Well, if the cost went up by 15%, but you had, 35% increase in business, you're actually increased the efficiency, not decreased the efficiency, and it's money well spent. So you can go to the next one. You really want to look at the complete picture of cost versus investment. So as you just look at the cost increases, you could say, well, look, my costs are constantly increasing. But if you add in the revenue that is being generated, so go ahead and advance. We'll put the revenue line over it. If your revenue is increasing at a larger rate, you can see that you're actually getting better at the value. So the value is the ratio of the revenue to the cost. So you can continue. It's going to give a little indication of that. Yeah, that's good. You can go to the next slide. So the next design principle is to stop spending money on undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? So by this, we really mean things like starting with racking and stacking servers, right? I always, when explaining this to my relatives about what I do, I'm like, well, you're aware of the fact that companies like clothing stores, in order to operate websites, were basically paying people to go and build server racks, build it up, build networking, and manage and operate all that stuff. But their business is really in designing clothes that people want to buy and selling that clothes to people. So the business value for them is really to build better applications. So this is once again another example of you can move further up the stack on this. It's not just managed by undifferentiated heavy lifting. It's not just the actual physical building of servers, but it can be moved further and further up the stack to where you're not managing operating systems, you're not managing the actual runtime containers themselves. Like if you go as far as AWS Lambda, it's completely abstracted out. The compute that you're running on, the operating system that you're running on, the thing that you pick is the version of the runtime that you're running on, and even the maintenance of that is done by your cloud provider. So now you can advance. The next design principle is to analyze and attribute expenditure. And this is really something that I think JT is probably going to definitely dive deep on, which is in order to actually track this, you have to know where you're spending it. So you can go to the next slide. When you have just a giant amount of infrastructure that everyone is using, it's kind of hard to tell who's using what and who's causing and driving the costs. So if you can actually allocate those and attribute that to a particular team, you can actually determine who was driving these costs. So it's a concept known as a cost allocation tag, and it's really powerful in your ability to decide where you're going to want to spend money. And
yeah, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt, Rodney. I was going to say, like in many companies, you have like a lot of different teams provisioning resources.
Right.
And sometimes it becomes a little bit challenging to kind of figure out where is the cost increase coming from, or how do you which category should this cost go into, you know?
Right, exactly. And it's if you don't set yourself up with a good baseline of being able to do this, it can be a task to actually add it in after the fact. So it's really something we want people to identify up front. So kind of bringing it all together, right? These are the design principles that you should be thinking about when you're actually building your cloud systems. Make sure that you're practicing cloud financial management, adopt a consumption model, measure your overall efficiency. And remember, it's not just driving down what you're spending, but are you getting the value? You can see the same things that the cloud promises in itself, which is getting economies of scale. You'll actually find that as your business increases, you actually should get more efficient if you've designed your systems properly. Stop spending your money on undifferentiated heavy lifting. Concentrate on your business problems. And then last, analyze and attribute the expenditures. next slide is pretty much my last slide. So we have a bunch of resources. You'll get this presentation, and if you need these links, I can post them in questions as well. But we've got the WellArchitected framework itself, a specific paper for the cost optimization pillar. We have a website that actually has all the questions and best practices. We've got a number of open source labs under WellArchitectedLabs.com, and a number of those are specifically on cost optimization. I recommend that you read. Internally, we practice all these things, and we've got a bunch of our principal engineers that have written content in the Amazon Builders Library, and we have a whole site in our architecture site dedicated to cloud financial management.
Yeah.
That's what
Rodney,
I've got. Sure.
Yeah, this is very helpful, Rodney. I was going to say, one of the reasons I think WellArchitected is so effective, it really helps you to kind of bring your team together and, and kind of validate the pros and cons of your decisions. And I think it's so powerful, and, all the infrastructure I have built over the years, I found the WellArchitected tool to be very practical and effective,
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I'm glad you brought up. This is very pragmatic advice, right? It's not, we call it architecture astronaut. I always call it rocket surgery. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon to do this. It's really some pretty fundamental stuff that is fairly. It's very understandable. Now, it doesn't mean that with a large infrastructure, it's not difficult or not a large task, but it is conceptually all the well-architected principles are something that it should be fairly easy to understand.
Right. I think we have another poll here. Just Charlene, I think we'd love to review the results from the last poll.
Yeah, sure. We can take a look at the results. First, for the first poll that we pushed out, the question was, what is your familiarity with the AWS WellArchitected framework? 40% of respondents said that they were somewhat familiar. That's the largest number, followed by 31% who said they were not familiar and 29% who said they were very familiar. So we got a lot of middle of the road attendees today.
Cool. Yeah, that's very helpful.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our second poll. I'll push it out real quick. The question is, are you using a cloud management tool currently to help manage AWS costs? You can choose from yes, no, or currently evaluating. And the poll question is open for you right now. You can go ahead and make your choice. Again, I will leave it open. JT, you can go ahead and go on into your presentation. I'll close the polling question after about a minute or so, and then we'll take a look at the responses later.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, I'll go over 7 simple ways to reduce your AWS spend. So as Rodney mentioned, cloud gives you this huge advantage. It gives you the agility, and it gives you the competitive advantage to innovate faster. You can experiment things faster. You can go to market fast with your product. So there's a huge advantage of running your workloads on AWS. And, one of the things that could happen if cloud is not managed properly, you could end up kind of wasting a lot of money on cloud. So there was a tweet from Corey a couple of weeks ago. He asked this question about the AWS spend. So one of the things he was saying that your AWS bill is function of how many engineers you have. Over the years, I've worked with a lot of companies. It could get to a point where you have many engineers making changes. Many different teams are provisioning resources. So if you don't manage it properly, you can run into a situation where you have wastage on cloud. So that's why I truly believe the freedom of cloud, comes with the accountability of teams. So what I really mean by that is that, you have to bring tools and processes in place to build a better culture. So teams take accountability for AWS spend. So, I'll share some of these ways you can bring a better accountability culture. So I'll start with continuously right-sizing your infrastructure. I think this is very important because one of the things you do on cloud is it's easy to provision resources. Most of the time when you're building new workloads, you're not aware of the demand. You're not completely aware of the business needs because everything is kind of new. You're testing things out. But as you collect historical data, as you know the utilization, as you know the needs of your business, it's important that you constantly right-size your resources. And there are tools like NOps who can make this process easier. But it's important to constantly kind of make sure your resources are provisioned, one, to meet the demand, and obviously most important second thing is to meet the business needs. Because this is something you should do often to make sure your resources are aligned with your business objectives. In NOps, we make this process very, very easy. You can actually, we look at your historical utilization, and then we make recommendations. So, for example, this particular resource could actually be downsized to T3 Nano, and you end up saving $63. And as Rodney mentioned in one of his slides, that everything adds up. If you have like 10 of these just running that could be right sized, maybe if you downsize them, you'll probably end up saving thousands of dollars. And also, when you're right sizing your resources, we also give you option to look at how idle the resource is. So if the resource is 99% idle, maybe someone just forgot to turn it off, right? So this is a good opportunity to kind of sort your resources by how idle they are, and if there is an opportunity to kind of find if there's a better instance type you can use. We factor in CPU and memory metrics. We also look at RDS utilization, and we make recommendations. We also look at S3, and we make recommendations because many times you can move some of that stuff to like Glacier, and that's how you can save money. So we make this process very easy, where we look at your historical utilization, and we make recommendations based on that. So I highly recommend that you bring this kind of process in your team culture, where you regularly make sure that your resources are right sized. The second thing I think companies could do to bring better accountability and to save their costs is to bring this concept of chargeback. So Rodney, you touched on this a little bit. I think this is probably the best way to bring accountability across different teams. AWS gives you flexibility of like tagging resources. There's flexibility of running resources in different accounts and VPC. And the process I've seen work really well is, you define business units, and or you define your team, and you give them a quota. You can give them 6 months quota, or you can give them a year quota, and then or a year budget, and then you're kind of managing against that budget on month to month. You're kind of checking, let's say, QA environment, if maybe they ended up spending more money this month versus others, but overall you want to make sure that they're staying with the budget for the year. And you can also send like invoices to these teams. I find that to be very helpful as well, because you can build better culture of accountability when you're saying, hey, your business unit or your or this particular team is costing this much on AWS or on cloud. So we, I really recommend to bring this sort of culture where you're creating chargeback to different teams. Rodney, before I show the video, do you have any comment? Because I know you had a slide on this.
Yeah, My only comment is that that really is the key part to ensuring that you've got cost optimization and cost management, is just by incorporating that into your culture. And we unfortunately have come from a culture where most of the people who were operating and building things really had no idea what the specific costs were. And it is definitely a new skill for people. And I'm super happy that that people are adopting it in rapid fashion.
Yeah, and I noticed companies who are adopting something like this, they're like kind of, they're not throttling the innovation, but they're just putting some structure around, how they're going to manage their AWS. So I think it's very effective. So in NOps, you can actually create these chargebacks, and when you create chargebacks, you can, name it a business unit, or you can pick a team, and we allow you to pick, different dimensions. You can look at AWS account, you can look at a region, you can look at a service, or you can look at a tag. And then you can actually create a budget. You can create a monthly budget, you can create a monthly, a quarterly budget, or yearly budget for that particular unit. And then you can also add alerts on who do you want to notify, when the budget is, when the resources are exceeding the budget. One of the things about cloud is, you provision resources and you shut them down. So it might be that there are one team is over budget this month, but they might not use as many resources on next month, for example, right? So we make it very easy where you can set a budget for a year, and then we give you this nice visualization. You kind of see, like, where different teams are spending money, and are they on track? Are they not on track? Especially for this month, and were they overspending last month or whatnot? We also allow you to send an invoice right from here, and you can mark the status as paid and unpaid. And once again, I think this is just a great sort of practice to bring into your software development, or to your organization, to make sure that you have this culture where you're holding different teams accountable for their AWS spend. All right, so the third way, I think most of the companies can reduce their AWS costs is to delete unused resources. Sometimes as customers are kind of getting started with cloud, they're not aware that even if there are unused volumes that are attached to stopped instances, you still pay for those resources. So it's important to kind of have monitoring and tracking on all these different resources. So let's say if you have a EBS volume that is not attached to anything, or it's attached to a stopped instance, you're still kind of paying for it. So if you have automation that is creating these volumes and someone forgot to shut them down, it could get kind of expensive because everything adds up. So it's important that you monitor the unused capacity on your AWS environment and delete it as you go. And again, if you reduce your waste, you can take those funds and invest it into machine learning or other areas to innovate, right? That's the whole point of cloud. So it's useful to find these unused resources and delete them as you go. And I think that brings me to another point that you kind of want to make sure you get alerted real time whenever there are unused resources. One of the things I learned, by building infrastructure on cloud for so long is, after a while, it gets kind of complex because you have so many different teams, building different type of infrastructure. And, a year later, if you ask someone, hey, do you know what is this EBS volume for? That is like really, tough question, because maybe no one even know what was the original intent for that resource. So it's important to kind of get real-time notifications for these unused capacity. That way you could take action right away. And in NOps, you can not only you can look at all these resources that are unattached or attached to unused or attached to stop instances, you can also configure alerting. So you can select accounts. You can actually look at where the change is coming from, or if there's new unused volumes, you can look at those resources. You can go to AWS console if you wanted to, and then you also configure notifications, in like Slack if you like. So anytime there's a new unused volume or new load balancer without any EC2 instances, you can get notifications real time. Rodney, do you have any comments on that? I'm pretty sure you talk to customers where they have a lot of like unused resources and they weren't even aware of it.
Yeah, and that is actually a key thing, is that you talked about timeliness being important, and we have lots of capability for you being able to be notified of these kinds of things, and the InOps ties that into a nice little interface that makes it easy for people to find out. But it is really a key thing to ensure that you you don't leave things hanging around. We've gone into customers that have had you talked about EBS volumes, but old versions of S3, they turn on S3 versioning and they don't put a lifecycle policy on S3. And next thing you know, they've got thousands of old versions that they're paying for on S3, and there's no visual indication of that when you go to the bucket. It is very important.
Yeah, snapshots too, to that point, right?
Yep.
You might have like old snapshots that people forgot to delete, and obviously you can try to find this information in AWS, but tools like Unearth make it very, very easy for you, so you can quickly kind of find where there is an opportunity to save some costs.
All
right, so yeah, go ahead.
Definitely agree. I definitely agree. Is all I was saying.
Yep. All right, so another way I've seen people able to reduce costs on AWS is to identify unaccounted costs. So, as Rodney and I have been talking about, you have different teams, provisioning resources and building new stuff. And, every company adopts tagging policy. But there comes a point where you want to try to analyze, you want to try to understand, where do you stand right now? Where are the resources that are not, what are some of the resources that are not tagged right now? And when you kind of visualize your tag distribution, then sometimes you find, areas where you thought you were spending less. And then you also find areas where, resources are not tagged properly at all. In AWS, there are some services where tagging is not available at creation, so you have to go back and tag those resources. And over time, those resources could kind of pile up, and it just makes it hard to kind of know how you're spending money on AWS. So one of the things, I've seen very useful is to kind of analyze your current tag distribution and find resources that are not tagged. And I think this is normally an entry point. I've talked to so many customers, they're like, this is an entry point for them, like managers, where they'll kind of analyze the environment, then they'll start a conversation with their employees and, kind of ask them to maybe tag resources properly, or maybe they're resources that are no longer needed. So in Unearth, we do have a tag analyzer where you could quickly see all your untagged resources. You can look at these resources very quickly, and you kind of see who launched these resources. But you can also look at your resource distribution. So for example, this particular tag, how are you spending money in this particular tag? For example, username has these 5 different areas. You can hover over it. You can just look at those resources. And this is like game changer to kind of understand, how you're spending money on your accounts right now. And then, if you want to look at AWS console, you could do that. In Unearth, you can also search for anything. If you want to search for a tag or an account and see how are you aligning with WellArchitected framework, you could do that as well. So I know, Rodney, I'm pretty sure you have comments on this one because I'm pretty sure you talk to a lot of customers around tagging.
Yeah, and tagging is nuanced, right? The cost allocation tags are something that you can you can use a lot of, and sometimes you end up having to combine things in order to figure out how to compute what the costs are. You talk about data transfer itself. That's often something that has to be combined with something like VPC flow logs to attribute to a particular tag. So it is something that there's nuance on this. It's definitely true, and tools like InOps really help our customers figure out what those are.
Yeah, it's a good baseline to kind of see where you stand right now. Maybe there are resources which are not tagged. Networking cost is like perfect example. Maybe you're sharing networking across multiple teams. So by analyzing your current tags, it really helps you to kind of find out what percentage of your cost is not tagged properly, and so you can start conversations with different teams. Another way to reduce AWS cost is review your networking costs. If you look at your AWS spend, most of the workloads, I think the networking cost is up there. It's like fourth or fifth line item after EC2 and S3 costs. So, I did write a blog post on this, and we'll share a slide deck. Networking costs could be kind of complex on AWS. There are different type of networking costs that you'll end up paying depending on how you architected your application. But one of the things I want you to maybe walk away with from this webinar is to kind of look at this data transfer regional byte cost on your AWS bill. So if you're transferring data across availability zone, you pay for transferring that data out, and you also pay for transferring that data into another availability zone. So, if your workload doesn't need to be high availability, if it's like a dev environment, test environment, or just a batch job infrastructure, maybe keep everything in one availability zone. So that way you're not paying extra for the networking cost. And in NOps, we kind of index everything. So you can look at your bandwidth costs. So you can search for this bandwidth cost, and then you can look at where this cost is coming from. So you can find the resources associated to that particular cost. And you can also look at usage type related to it, like, it's coming from load balancer. And then you can also look at your interzone and interzone in and interzone out traffic. So that way, when you're looking at a resource, you know exactly how much you're paying on bandwidth for each one of these resources. This is like super helpful. I've talked to customers where they pay a lot of money on bandwidth, and sometimes kind of a black box because they don't know which resources are generating this bandwidth cost. So, I highly encourage you to, sign up for a tool like NOps and just kind of analyze your bandwidth cost and try to find out what resources are generating the bandwidth cost. All right, so another ways I've seen companies save cost on AWS is to kind of monitor cost trends real time. It's important because cloud is such a dynamic environment. You have different teams, different people provisioning resources. It could, there's a lot of fluctuation, right? So maybe you provision a lot of resources on Monday, and on Tuesday and Wednesday there aren't like that much new resources. And the point is there's a lot of fluctuation. You provision resources, then you shut them down. And what you really want to do is monitor cloud trends kind of real time. That way, as people are making changes, you know why are they're making certain decisions. So if the cost for a particular RDS instance went down, you could start a conversation right there with the team and to kind of make sure they're making the right decision. In this example, there are some new resources that team launched. So you could quickly look at these new resources. And you also want to monitor whenever people are not following best practices. So if there's an S3 bucket that as of today is not optimized for the storage type, you want to know that today because you want to start that conversation with that team to kind of reduce the cost for it. It's easier as we're kind of still sort of in the architecture mode, and things like that become incredibly difficult to do like year later, because year later you might not even know who provisioned that resource, because on cloud you're provisioning resources all the time. Any points on that, Rodney? I'm pretty sure you talked to a lot of customers around this as well, right?
Yeah, I was going to say the real key thing is what you hit on, which is it's way easier to do things early than it is to do it later. It's not, maybe easy may not be the word. It's a smaller task if you do it early than if you wait to do it later when you have lots of things that you've done. That's one of the reasons why we preach that you should be looking at the well-architected framework as your building systems on AWS, migrating systems to AWS. You really want to bring in as many good fundamental best practices as soon as possible, because it's the cheapest time to do it, but both by time and people.
Yeah, because it's so fresh, right?
Yep,
year later,
exactly.
you have to kind of look up documentation and figure out why did you make that decision, and for what reason.
I always say if it's something that I did more than 6 months ago, it might as well have been someone else that did it. So you lose track of the details.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think this brings to our final point here, right? Aligning your infrastructure with well-architected framework. This is so important because you really need to evaluate the pros and cons of your decision. In some cases, you might want to prioritize reliability. In some cases, maybe you don't care about reliability. It's just a dev environment, staging environment. Rodney shared an example. Maybe you don't need infrastructure running on the weekend, right? So it really comes down to just validating, just evaluating the pros and cons of your decision. And as the business needs change and as the demand change for the workloads, it's important that you regularly do these well-architected assessments to make sure that you're still aligned, with the well-architected framework. And in NOps, we have native integration with the well-architected tool, so you can create a workload in NOps. We currently support well-architected review and foundational technical review. Then you can select which account you want to do the assessment, and if you select create workload on the AWS account, we'll actually we'll make an API call and we'll push this to the well-architected tool. And then you could do this assessment. We do auto discovery on a lot of the questions, and we tell you where there are high risk issues, where do you need improvements, and we make this process very, very easy. Another thing you could do is just search for anything in NOps. You can look at your prod environment and kind of see what are the cost issues in prod environment and what are the new opportunities related to the cost in your prod environment. So, we highly recommend to continuously align your infrastructure with the well-architected framework. This is probably the best way to make sure that you're optimized and you're not wasting a lot of money on cloud.
Yeah,
all right. So
I was going to say, I like the point that you made about, continuously managing this, right? That's what goes back to the cloud financial management. This should be part of your operational cadence. You shouldn't be, looking at this once every, 6 months and going, oh my, where did all these things come from? It should be a much shorter cycle than that. And then the other thing really was around internally, Amazon does operational reviews, which are equivalent to the WellArchitected reviews of all our services at least annually. And the reason behind that has a lot to do with modern agile development processes. Most companies had policies and procedures that you needed to do a review if you're doing a major change, but small changes over the course of time add up to major changes. And you need to keep an eye on where those small changes added up, because you may accidentally introduce something that's never a deliberate action. It's always an action of omission. People didn't think of something when they did something, and it's easier, as we've said multiple times in this, easier to catch it early than it is to catch it late.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Rodney. So it just right now, honestly, it probably doesn't make sense to review your infrastructure like once in 6 months, because you're making changes every day, right? So you need to kind of maybe do it more frequently, and also build monitoring and processes to make sure you're kind of validating these almost like real time, because like changes are happening every day. Yep. Charlene, so I think we have one more poll here, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, let's roll forward with our last poll. But before we do, let's take a look at the results of the last poll that we pushed out. The question was, are you using a cloud management tool currently to help manage AWS cost? An overwhelming 49% said no, they're not. We had 27% say yes, and then 24% say they're currently evaluating. So I got to tell you that those poll results really surprised me.
Yeah, I think as Rodney and I have been talking about it, in this webinar, you get to a point in cloud environment, you do need a cloud management platform to kind of manage the complexity, because you have, so many different teams who are provisioning resources. So you definitely need a tool like ANOps to manage that kind of complexity.
All right. Well, we do have the last polling question now open. The question is, when was the last time you did a health check of your AWS environment or a priority workload? So you can go ahead and make a choice between less than a year, more than a year, never, or not sure. I sure hope we don't get a lot of people answering never, but we'll see. I'm going to go ahead and leave the polling question open for just a little bit and let you get back to your presentation, and then we'll take a look at the poll results before we get to the question and answer period.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have an offer, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. Like Rodney mentioned, most of the companies have some kind of sort of health check or operation review they do on their infrastructure often to kind of identify, high risk issues, find if there's an opportunity to create, chargebacks, or maybe there's an opportunity to delete some unused resources. So we do have an offer if you sign up for ANOps, and if you're interested in health check, we'll actually make one of the certified AWS solution architects available to you to review your environment with you. We'll review, we'll analyze your tags, we'll look at your unused resources, we'll help you to create budgeting. We'll also, we can also make sure that you're not paying a lot of money on the on networking costs and things like that. So I highly recommend to maybe sign up for this, and would love to work with you to kind of see if there's an opportunity to help you to remediate some of the high risk issues on your environment. All right, so before we kind of dive into Q&A, here are some resources. So, typically customers end up saving 18 to 15% leveraging ANOps, and most of the time, the tool kind of pays for itself because we're really good at finding opportunities for you to save money on AWS environment. We have a lot of happy customers, so we'll share this this deck. Please do look at these resources, especially the blog post I think we added here as well, the blog post on the bandwidth. I think it's really like kind of useful information to kind of make sure what type of different networking costs you can end up paying on AWS, and what are some of the ways to reduce that cost. All right, so I think before we jump into the Q&A, maybe Charlene, can you share the results from the poll?
Yeah, sure I can. So I just closed them out. So it should be nice and fresh and hot and waiting for us. Okay, the last question that we asked everybody was, when was the last time you did a health check of your AWS environment or a priority workload? These looks like 43%, the majority was less than a year, which I guess is great. The second one is 33% who said never. And then we had 13% who said more than a year, and then 10% who said they're not sure. So I think those are some interesting results there.
Absolutely.
And yeah, just a quick note to everybody. If you have a question for Rodney or for JT, go ahead and use your Q&A tab and get your question in. You can also chat it out to us. That's fine. We can grab it from there as well. But we do have about 7 or 8 minutes for question and answer, so plenty of time. Let's see, the first one. How is this related to the work done by the FinOps/Linux Foundation? And JT, I think this one may be directed at you, but I'm not entirely sure.
I'm not familiar with that. Rodney, are you familiar with FinOps?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
Do you want to take that one, Rodney? Or sorry, you kind of broke up.
Yeah, so we actually, I'll take that one. So the whole concept of cloud financial management is FinOps, right? It really is, and we actually actively participate with the Linux Foundation in their FinOps. We've got an organization that works with our open source communities that are headed under an SVP, and we are participating with it. So we influence. So if you ask how it's related, we influence what gets published on the FinOps standards, and we definitely pay attention to what's being done there. I think this is another thing I should probably mention, which is the WellArchitected framework isn't just things that we think you should be doing. We actually base the best practices upon what people are actually doing and getting success out of. So if we see customers doing things and being successful with them, we definitely adopt them. So.
Yeah, I actually missed. I misheard. I thought it was FinOps for some reason. Yeah, FinOps I'm very familiar, and I think Rodney is like very similar to WellArchitected, right? It's all about business outcomes, right? And it's very similar. The goal is exactly the same. How do you build better accountability so you can leverage cloud to innovate?
Correct. Yep.
All right. Great.
It's indirect but direct. How's that?
Yeah.
It's the same. I get it. All right, great. So Charles just sent in a question. Which monitoring tools are recommended in visibility into Kubernetes management?
I have a recommendation. We leverage Datadog quite a bit for getting visibility into the Kubernetes environment, but there are other tools people end up using, like Prometheus and things like that. But commercial grade software, I think like Datadog is probably the one that I've used and I like.
Yeah, and I was going to say it's very common that Prometheus is being used, and it can be used to directly feed into your cost optimization and value tracking.
All right, great. All right, we have We have time for a couple more questions here. So if you've got one, go ahead and use your question and answer tab, or just use your chat tab, get it on in. We do have one question from Mike and Rodney. I wanted to ask you if you wanted to maybe take this one offline, because it does seem very complex. And so rather than kind of go into the weeds and down the rabbit hole, to use this common vernacular these days, maybe that's just one that you want to take offline with Mike and get his question answered. So which means that we have time, guys. Send me another question before we close things out. And while we're waiting to see if we do get any more questions, and I just want to remind the audience that today's event is being recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. Following today's webinar, we are going to be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. The webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website, so you can always go look for it there. You can just go to DevOps.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section, and it should be waiting right there for you. All right, looking like we're not getting any more questions, and I'm going to leave the question and answer tab open for folks to put in any last minute questions if they do have any, or if they think of any at the last minute. Even if we don't get to the question during the webinar, please know that the folks at NOPS will be getting a copy of all of the questions that came in. So we should definitely have an answer for you in one way or another. Okay, let's see. With that, I'm going to go ahead and do the drawing for the $425 Amazon gift cards, and let's go ahead and do that now. Get over to that screen here. All right, today's winners for the $25 Amazon gift cards. Our first winner today is Angela E. Congratulations, Angela. Our second winner today is Linda G. Congratulations, Linda. Third winner today is Andrew W. Congratulations, Andrew. And our final winner today is Brad P. Congratulations, Brad. We'll be following up with all 4 of you via email to get your gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. If you don't see anything there, please check your spam folder. We may have just gotten one more question in. Yeah, okay, we just got one more question in. I'll go ahead and ask you guys real quick before we close things out. The question is, how often, this is from Trish, how often should we perform a health check of our AWS?
Yeah, I think, kind of depends. Most of the companies are running different workloads on AWS environment, like at least once in 3 months, and as you're making changes to your workload, we highly recommend to run a health check as well. And for those of you who said, who haven't done the health check on your environment, I highly recommend sign up for NOPS and maybe ask for the health check so we can work with you to find some opportunities to save on your account, So looking forward to working with you to doing these health checks. All
right. All right. Okay, well, that is it for the question and answer period. So I'm going to go ahead and close out the question and answer period. I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. There were some really great ones there, and I do appreciate you guys engaging in that way. Just one more time, just reminding that today's event has been recorded. So keep an eye on your email. Later on, you will be getting a link to access the webinar on demand should you want it. And as I said before, it's also going to be on the DevOps.com website, so you can go find it there as well. JT and Rodney, thank you both so much for a great presentation today. Lots and lots of really great stuff between all the slides and the videos and all that good stuff. There are lots and lots of really great information. And judging from the comments and questions we got from the audience, I know they got a lot out of it as well. So thank you again. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. You've been a great audience. And but for now, this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.